Howdy folks, coming on here to do a video talking about Disney movies. Now, in recent years, Walt Disney has decided to remake a lot of their remake a lot of their animated classics as live action remakes. And as things would have it, the results are varied. So, what I've managed to do is I've pulled out of my Blu-rays and DVDs, and because a couple of them are not available on disc, they are 100% Disney Plus streaming movies. And I decided to do a comparison. Now, how am I comparing this from one film to the other? Well, the thing of it is, there really isn't a really good way to do so. And because if you're talking financially, it's not going to be a fair comparison, because one, mainly, is that the price of a movie admission from back in 1950 is not going to be the same as a movie admission as it is in 2023. So, and plus, again, some of these films never went to the theater. They went straight to Disney Plus as a streaming exclusive. Now, there are some rules that I am taking in here. For most part, I'm not talking any live action remakes. I'm talking about films that are technically animated classics that have been remade for modern audiences. There is one film in particular that I had to bend the rules a little bit because it's both animated and live action, and we'll get to that in a moment. So, what I managed to do, in order to do any comparison, I did not base it on any financial comparison. I based it on critical and audience reception. How did I do that? I went to the website Rotten Tomatoes to get the results. I'm basing it on what critics' reception is and the audience reception. So you have to compare those two in this day and age, because a lot of times the critics and the audiences are completely diverse. They're more divided than politicians, okay? So, the first thing we're going to talk about is 101 Dalmatians. And I've even thrown in a few sequels to give some comparison, because it does add a little bit. So, 101 Dalmatians. The animated film from 1961, the critics are at a 98% with a 76% audience review. So it's pretty high up there with, it's pretty high in terms of the audience and the critics liking it. But like I said, how divided? 98% with the critics, 76% with the audience. Okay. So, but in 1996, that's how far back Disney has been doing this, with the Glenn Close 101 Dalmatians. I'm not comparing the 102 Dalmatians for whatever reason, but I decided not to count that. But 101 Dalmatians from 1996, critics gave it a 41%, while the audience gave it a 40%. And I actually remember kind of liking this one. However, it is a little dull. Glenn Close as Cruella de Vil is awesome. But as a movie as a whole, it's it's kind of I mean, and this was even written and produced by John Hughes, one of the few films that he's done with Disney. So, yeah. And as part of a sort of semi-sequel, we have, and this is even more modern, it's Cruella from 2021 with a 75% critic score and a 97% audience score. So yeah, there you go. And this isn't even really a sequel, really. It's more of its own thing, really. Okay, next up we have Aladdin. We have the original animated film from 1992 with a 95% critic score and a 92 audience score. Yeah, and this is the classic one, Robin Williams as the genie. And then we have the 2019 remake with Will Smith with a 57% critics rating and a 94% audience. This one kind of surprised me that the audience rating is 94% because the people I've talked to prefer this one. So yeah, there we go. Aladdin. Next we have Alice in Wonderland. The only, in terms of the 1951 classic, I was only able to find the audience score, which is at a 90% on Rotten Tomatoes. And then we have the 2010 Tim Burton directed live action version with Johnny Depp with a 51% critic score, 55% audience score. And then from there we have the sequel, Alice Through the Looking Glass, in 2016, sitting at a 29% critics review with a 48% audience score. See how, as you can see, how divisive the audiences and the critics are. Now we come to Beauty and the Beast, the 1991 animated classic. Sits at both for the audiences and the critics at a 93%. So that means that the audience and the critics both agree pretty evenly with the 1991 animated classic. And then for the 2017 live action remake, we have a 71% critic score and an 80% audience score. And this is the nice Best Buy Steelbook for this. So, no, I actually thought this one was pretty decent, actually. The only thing I really didn't like was the design of the Beast. I thought Digital Domain could have done a little bit better on his design, but it is what it is. So, okay, moving along. There's a lot here, so that's why I'm kind of going through these kind of quickly. I'm kind of going as I have it written here. However, I'm missing one. I'm actually missing Cinderella here. So yeah, we should have Cinderella, but I don't have it written down. I don't know. Let's look up real quick here what that is. Rotten Tomatoes. Okay. Okay, so we're looking here. Okay, from 1950, we have Cinderella. There is no rating. That is weird. That is weird. There is no rating for the... Anyhow, so let's see if we can't go back here. Because I saw... Let's try this again. Sometimes Rotten Tomatoes can be... Alright, go back. Yeah, I just seen it. Okay. Here we go. Cinderella from 1950 sits at a critics rating of 97% with an audience score of 80%. So, yeah, that one's pretty high. So now let's look at the live action remake from 2015, I believe. Okay, where's it at? Come on. Now, there was a 1990s made-for-TV version with Whitney Houston that was also done, but not really going to count that one. I'm counting the ones that's going theatrically. Okay, so the 2015 version, directed by Kenneth Branagh and starring Lily James and Helena Bonham Carter, that ranks at 84% with an audience score of 78%. So this one technically is pretty good based on Rotten Tomatoes. So, and you'll see where I'm kind of going with this. Okay. Okay, so close that out. We'll go back to the page here. Okay, now back on track. We have the 1941 version of Dumbo. Critics rating is at 98% with an audience rating of 70%. Now the 2019 Tim Burton one, 46% critics, 48% audiences. So, yeah. Next up we have The Jungle Book, the 1967 classic, 88% critics rating and an 82% audience rating. And of course this is the classic one. And then we have the 2016 Jon Favreau live action film with a 94% critics rating and an 86% audience rating. So it's just a little bit higher than the original. So I don't know what the deal is there, but this is yeah, and this one was actually pretty successful when it came out. So now next up is Lady and the Tramp. This is the original 1955 release. The critics give it a 93%, while the audience gave it an 80%. And then there's no disc-based version of this, so there was just a Disney Plus streaming version. However, I do have the rating. That was released in 2019. It has a 66% critics rating with a 50% audience rating. So it's rare. Well, let's get into a final result with all this. So the next up, with the success of Jon Favreau directing The Jungle Book, he decides to tackle The Lion King. So we have the original 1994 The Lion King, with both the audiences and the critics unanimously agreeing, same as Beauty and the Beast, sitting at 93% on Rotten Tomatoes with the original animated film. Now for the 2019 remake by Jon Favreau, the critics give it a 52%, while the audiences give it an 88%. But see, this is one I felt that was not necessary, because it is literally a shot-for-shot remake. But even that, it's really not live action. I mean, that's all CGI. So, yeah. So, that leads us to a more recent edition, which is The Little Mermaid. Now, the original 1989 classic, the critics gave it a 91%, and the audience gives it a 88%. So, pretty close. Now, this is how divisive the live action one is. See, here's the nice steelbook edition from Best Buy. This came out in 2023. The critics give it a 67% rating. The audience gave it a 94%. I myself was like that. I was neither thumbs up or thumbs down. I thought Halle Bailey as Ariel, wonderful, beautiful. She served the role. I thought she was unfairly judged by the conservative right for the whole racial. Really, did it have to amount to that? Really? But, moving along. So, I'm skipping Maleficent for now, because I'll come back to that. So, the next up we have Mulan. The original from 1998 has an 86% critics score, 85% audience score. And then we have the 2020 live action remake. Now, to be fair, and this is why I chose to go by critic and audience reviews, because this came out right at the peak of COVID-19. So there was no way that you could fairly talk about the financial audience speak. So you have to go by audience review and critic review. So, again, Mulan 2020, the critics gave it a 72% rating, while the audience gave it a 46%. So, yeah. Now, this is one where I'm kind of bending the rules a little bit, because this film, when it originally came out, was a partly animated live action film. You could say that about Mary Poppins, but Mary Poppins did not get a remake, it got a sequel. I am not counting Mary Poppins or Mary Poppins Returns because of that. Because that is a bona fide, just plain sequel to the original film. I'm talking about films that were adapted from the animated film to a live action film. But this film, I had to kind of bend the rules a little bit because it's both animated and live action, and that is Pete's Dragon from 1979, or 1977 rather. Now, the critics from the 1977 film give it a 56%, and the audiences give it a 60%. And now the reason why the critics were so low on this, even at the time, they thought it was just kind of rehashing what Disney had learned with Mary Poppins and combining of the live action and the animation. And the animation was done by Don Bluth, or directed by Don Bluth. One of the few things that he did with Disney before he fled the studio because he didn't like the direction that they were going in. Okay, now that leads us to the 2016 remake with, let's see who was in this. Bryce Dallas Howard and Carl Urban. It is the 2016 film with a critics rating of 88%, and that's why it says certified fresh. Yeah. Critics gave it a 88%, audiences gave it a 72%. So that's a pretty good rating for being certified fresh on Rotten Tomatoes. Okay? So, yeah, there you go. Now we come to Peter Pan. This is another one that there's no disc based for the live action remake. And that would be, from 1953. Critics give it a 77%, audiences give it an 80%. And the 2023 Peter Pan and Wendy has a 64% rating, while the audiences give it a 11%. So obviously, this is where we definitely get into some woke agenda stuff, where it's going to reflect on the audience. Okay, next up we have Pinocchio from 1940. The critics give it a 100%. And the audiences give it a 73. Again, certified fresh. And now we have again no disc-based media version for the 2022 film, directed by Robert Zemeckis, starring Tom Hanks. Critics give it a 28%, while the audiences give it a 27%. So that film is rotten. I could not sit through all of that film. I skimmed it because I heard such terrible things about it. I skimmed through it. And I did not like what I saw. This one, he actually turned into a real boy. The remake, he chose to live as a real boy. I'm just going to leave it right there. Okay, finally, we are going to talk about Sleeping Beauty. Now, this one is kind of an odd way of doing things because they didn't just do a straight up remake. They did a alternate look. So, from the Sleeping Beauty, original Sleeping Beauty from 1959, has a critics rating of 89%. The audiences give it a 80%. This one was more of a, if you look at Sleeping Beauty, this one was more of a technical achievement rather than wowed audiences. Because it was shot, this was the first animated film, as far as I know, that was filmed in 70 millimeter. And so 70 millimeter has a really wide image. And so they were very, very technological and innovative with this film. Now, reception-wise, in terms of the story and how Disney told the story, audiences were a little, well, they said, well, it was good, but it wasn't great like it could have been, because at the time Walt Disney was focusing on building Disneyland at the time. But the film was still popular enough that Sleeping Beauty's castle is the castle that's at Disneyland. So it's Princess Aurora's castle at Disneyland, and it's Cinderella's at Walt Disney World in the Magic Kingdom. So, but Disney decided to remake Sleeping Beauty, but told it from the villain's perspective. So we have Maleficent, which came out in, let's see, what did I write down? In 2014, starring Angelina Jolie and Elle Fanning as Princess Aurora. Again, Angelina Jolie as Maleficent. Now that came out with a 54% critic score and a 70% audience score. So the audiences liked it a little bit better than the critics did. And of course, a little bit of help from Rick Baker to turn Angelina Jolie into Maleficent with the square jaw. And then that film obviously was successful enough with the audiences that they decided to do a sequel, Maleficent, Mistress of Evil. Now, this is where it really gets divided. The critics gave it a 39%, while the audiences gave it a 95%. So, as you can see where this is going. So, there's a mixture of things going on here amongst all of these films and the audience. Now, what am I getting at? First of all, in terms of critic and audience response, they do tend to, first of all, the critics and audiences are divided definitely with the live action versions. And another thing that you have on top of it is political agendas. Like things that are forced into it that shouldn't have been there in the first place. Already, because we know Snow White is in production, they have Hercules in production, or in pre-production, with Guy Ritchie directing that, because he's already had some success with Aladdin. But yeah, Guy Ritchie is doing Aladdin, or I'm sorry, Hercules, and Snow White is in post, I believe, right now, and already is causing problems by two key things, and it's politically based, and the audiences are not having it. Now, to be fair, The Little Mermaid I thought Halle Bailey was unfairly judged, because the fact that she is an African American girl playing what was in the animated film a stereotypical white girl. But me and my brother just had a discussion about that, and because we grew up watching The Little Mermaid, as millions of other children did, and we did not see that Ariel was really tied to any race, that any child could have related to her. It just happened to be they just happened to draw her as a white redhead. And I would encourage you to look at the behind the scenes of the original animated The Little Mermaid. They didn't even know what she was going to look like. It was going to be even more, whitewashed than what you think it was, what they ended up doing. Because the studio president at the time, Jeffrey Katzenberg, said mermaids are to be blonde-headed and white blonde-headed women. Because at the time, Disney had made Splash with Daryl Hannah and Tom Hanks. Daryl Hannah is this white blonde-headed girl, and so he couldn't get Daryl Hannah out of his head. And so it was the animators that said, we need to think about more creative colors to be making that character. And so that's why Ariel is a redhead. And they were looking at more creative colors in terms of the lighting and the shadows and the environment that the character is in, because you can stick a redheaded girl in pretty much anything as opposed to a blonde and have it look good. Now, but where Snow White is running into trouble is, one, Rachel Ziegler has made some controversial statements about Prince Charming being a creep. And two, they're not using dwarves to actually play the seven dwarfs. Matter of fact, I don't think they even call them seven dwarves. They're more like pirates. Which makes no sense. It's Snow White and the seven dwarfs. It's not Snow White and the pirates. Or the bandits, whatever the heck they are. And you know for darn sure that Disney is not stopping production and fixing the problem. Because that is a case where in the book you need a white-skinned girl to play the part. Because it describes her, black hair and skin white as snow. That's why she's called Snow White. So let's just be honest, folks. these are fairy tales. They are fairy tales, nothing more, nothing less. They're not meant to be making political statements. They don't need to be corrected. They are fairy tales. They are relevant to whatever period that we live in. And Disney, the audience scores, the box office receipts is reflecting of that, because the majority of the audience that you are tailoring to doesn't want that. You know, and I understand, and I probably get that you're probably trying to change people's minds. Well, people are not that stupid. People are people. Not, whatever. It's the people who decide. And I said this with the Sound of Freedom review. You answer with your money. Whatever you spend your money on, you are saying where you stand. And so, and they're wondering why they're hurting so much in everything they do. How about the suggestion? How about stop tailoring to a side? Stop tailoring to a hidden political agenda. Now, I'm not saying go conservative either, but try to please the common audience. You need to listen to your audience. Don't listen to what a small section are saying. You need to listen to the whole audience as a whole. I live here in Indiana. We are what is called a flyover state. But you know something? Those flyover states have more people than the people that live in New York, in California. But at the same token, those two coasts states are the ones who determine what goes on in the culture, unfortunately. We need to change that. So, that's what I wanted to share with this video. So I pulled out the originals. I pulled out the remakes. And where does the audiences stand? Well, as you can see, for a while, the audiences do kind of like them. But then when forced agenda gets into the way, audiences don't like them so much. They're very divided in terms, of course, the critics are going to be a part of the machine to support the studios somewhat. And then you got the audiences that are free thinkers that could go either way. Like I said, The Little Mermaid got, what, 94% for the live action remake, and while the critics only gave it like a 60-something. But I digress. I would think, if I had to choose between any of the live action remakes that I think are really good, I would say the Cinderella one is pretty good. Beauty and the Beast is pretty good. Despite I have some issues with some of the designs and stuff like that, but that's little. And then you have The Little Mermaid. It's okay. And also with Beauty and the Beast, I think is what kind of started the woke agenda being forced into the live action remakes, because if, as you recall, that film had the character LeFou possibly being portrayed as a gay character. I thought it was kind of portrayed as like a joke, as a bad executed joke, but I see where audiences are coming from. Again, the audiences are not stupid. They know what they want and don't want to see in their movies. So, from me to you, see you later.